Coming up, some potential big news for Florida as a transfer target maybe has definitely hit the open market. We'll talk about it all next right here on SEC Country Live. Hello everyone and welcome to SEC Country Live. My name is Brandon Adams. This is the former Alabama All-American Mike Johnson. Do not adjust your set, as they used to say back in the 80s. We are wearing slightly different shades of red. There's no telling what this must be doing to your eyes and your screen and the pixelization on the screen there. I would say that mine's the true red. Yours is a little bit more of a faded version?
A crimson. Listen, I'm actually shocked this has never happened before.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, we've been doing this show for 14, 15 months now. I don't think we've ever worn red.
Yeah, this much the same color. Yeah, exactly. Now, you look a lot better in yours than I look in mine, although I would say that my red looks a lot better than yours does. But nonetheless, let's get to the important stuff here. Item number 1 on our list on the SEC Country Live First and 10. This is the time of year where a few programs are going to work that waiver wire and bring somebody in at the last minute. Some SEC teams have already done it. Some SEC teams may be hopeful to do it before summer practice begins. One of those teams potentially could be Florida. Let me tell you why. It all centers around potential graduate transfer quarterback Joe Burrow from Ohio State. We say potential because up until a couple of hours ago, that's exactly what Burrow was. Here is what a 24/7 sports analyst recently said on an Ohio State podcast about Burrow transferring. He says, I think it's real. I think the fact that Joe is pretty forthright and honest when he's asked about it, he could give the company line an answer of, oh, I'm staying here, this is my school. No, he's not doing that. I know there's a lot of Nebraska stuff out there between Joey, Nebraska, Scott Frost, and that could very well be real. The school I heard yesterday, and it makes sense, is Florida. So Florida for Ohio State transfer quarterback Joe Burrow, at least according to Bill Green from 24/7 Sports on the Ohio State podcast there. Now, it just so happens that Florida coach Dan Mullen spoke last night in Lakeland, Florida, as a part of one of these spring-summer speaking tour events. The subject of grad transfer quarterbacks coming up. Would Florida want to add one? Mullen told reporters last night the answer to that question was no. Here is what Mullen had to say about that in that regard, talking to a crowd of folks in Lakeland saying, not right now, we're not really looking at it. I feel pretty good about the guys that we have. You know, the depth that we're creating at that position and the competition at that position. I don't know. I don't think we would take one. Baker Mayfield left, right? Ha, ha, ha. He graduated and left. You know, I don't think that's a spot we would look to take anyone. At this point, there's no plan on taking a grad transfer. That's Dan Mullen from Lakeland, Florida last night. There is a reason, though, I believe that Mullen would say that, whether he's interested in one or not, because at the time, Joe Burrow was not a quarterback on the market. He was still a member of Urban Meyer's Ohio State team. That is not the case anymore. Here is what Joe Burrow tweeted earlier today. After weeks of struggling with the decision, I've decided to leave Ohio State and explore my other options. My teammates and coaches all know the love I feel for them. I will decide where I will play next year in the coming weeks. Maybe Nebraska is the favorite. Maybe Florida, as the reporter from 24/7 Sports suggested, in the mix here. How big potential news is this for the opportunity for Florida to maybe consider adding another quarterback?
I think it's a big deal. I think this was Dan Mullen giving the company line. And by the way, Scott Frost delivered the same company line. He says, you know what? I think I'd rather go into battle with what we have than try to muddy the waters with another graduate transfer. Here's my problem with that, though, man. This is not just another graduate transfer. This is not Malik Zaire coming to the Florida program. Joe Burrow is a very good quarterback. Not only that, he's got 2 years left of eligibility. This is not a guy that's just going to stop through the program for 6 months and head out and try to get an NFL future and try to do a lot of other things. This is a good quarterback with 2 years left. Right now at Florida, you don't have one of those guys. You don't have anybody, in my opinion, with the talent level of Joe Burrow. So if you're Dan Mullen right now, I would take a long, hard look at what my words were last night and the situation that's developed today. Look at some of the film, talk to Urban Meyer if you need to, and try to make a more educated statement on this.
Well, you say talk to Urban Meyer, and Sean McKenzie in the Facebook comment section brings up that point that, you know, Meyer was at one point in time Dan Mullen's boss. Mullen was his offensive coordinator. The thought is they're probably still running a fairly similar offense, even though it's Kevin Wilson who's, I guess, leading that now for Ohio State, but it's still those same Meyer principles that Dan Mullen's probably using here. That would be a pretty easy transition for Burrow to make here from Meyer over to a Mullen. And, you know, I believe that it's an easy fix for Dan Mullen in terms of what he said last night. Oh, we didn't know that Joe Burrow was going to be available. Of course he knew, he just can't say anything about it. But now Burrow is available, and I'm not sure when, you know, reporters might have a chance to corner Mullen on the subject again. By the time he speaks again, he'll have every opportunity to kind of get his ducks in a row about whether or not they really are pursuing him or not. This is one of those things that probably won't be spoken about much at all until he shows up one day wearing orange and blue.
Yeah, I think so. And listen, what do you have to lose if you're Dan Mullen? I know that we talk about muddying the waters, and this guy's a good player. At least nothing else. Get this guy on campus. I don't know if it's an official visit. I'm sure that he'll do due diligence. By the way, his dad's a coach at Ohio. His dad also played at Nebraska with his uncles. They all played at Nebraska. Scott Frost has that connection with him. So there's always that opportunity. And I think that he will look hard at Nebraska. But Tennessee fans will remember a guy named Adrian Martinez. I think a lot of people expect him to be the starting quarterback down at Nebraska. So I think you'd be dumb if you're Dan Mullen not to at least get this guy on campus or talk to Urban Meyer about what's possible.
On Facebook, Christopher Willis says, we need a good 3 or 4 year quarterback, not this right now. Christopher, I'm not a Florida fan, so I can't speak for you and your program here and the program that you cheer for. I think those words, though, are 1,000% wrong. You mentioned the fact that they have 2 years of eligibility.
It's not a Band-Aid.
Which is a huge deal here, but you can't be terrible. And I'm sorry, I know Florida fans think I'm just trolling when I say this, but I mean this in all sincerity. With the quarterbacks Florida currently has, they are heading for a terrible season. As a guy that you see what colors I'm wearing right now, bad news for me if Joe Burrow goes to Florida, because the chance of the Gators being terrible, all of a sudden not as high as they once were. With the quarterbacks Florida currently has, they're heading for a nosedive season. You bring in a guy good enough to earn a scholarship at Ohio State. Florida has not been recently recruiting quarterbacks of the caliber that could earn scholarships at Ohio State. You bring a guy like this in, Florida's in a much better position, and the fact that you even have 2 years of eligibility here, it may take 2 years for Emory Jones to be ready based on some of the scuttlebutt from the spring.
I completely agree. And listen, this is not. I'm trying to make this as apparent as it can possibly be. This is not. Well, this guy. How do we know this guy's going to know the offense? He's just going to show up this summer, and will he be ready for? This guy's running the same offense. I mean, he's doing the same things. I don't know the same terminology, but it's a lot of the same principles. So it's not like you have to teach him offensive principles. It's not like Emory Jones showing up from high school and saying, hey, this is the big playbook. You have to learn it. This guy knows the ins and the outs of this offense. He knows the reads. He's been around this system for 3 years now. So if he has 2 years left, this is not a Band-Aid situation. Get this guy on the field. By the way, we talk about trajectories of programs. This would be a huge recruiting win for Dan Mullen. Whether or not this guy's on the field, this is a good situation.
It would rival some of the things we've seen Jeremy Pruitt do at Tennessee, where he sort of rattled some pots and pans. This would be an example of that. And as far as reason why Joe Burrow is even a necessity for Florida, as Dan Mullen told us at the end of spring practice, his quarterbacks have a lot to work on. The ones that are currently on the roster, they've got a lot to work on going into the summer.
I want to see a lot more out of them moving forward. I saw some really good things. I saw some miss simple things. It gets into the speed of the decision-making, comfort of the offense. And I'll watch them make a great read and get to a second or third read in the progression pretty quickly, make a great throw, move the chains. And then the next one, I'll watch them miss the first read and try to launch one down the field or miss an easy throw that they should make. I'll be honest, there's no more important position during the summer for those guys to work on their own every day. Muscle memory, taking steps, footwork, throw in motion. I don't care if they're even throwing to receivers. Everything over and over and over again, so that they are much better players August 4th than they were today.
Yeah, better players on August 4th. That's when the Florida summer practice is at least thought to going to be beginning. And as they do that, when they get there on August 4th, they may look around and see one more person standing in that huddle with them.
Yeah, they definitely should. And honestly, I've been higher on Florida than you have because I think the depth is there at so many different positions. I think their offensive line, given the new situation, and we'll talk about some good, juicy stuff about the strength and conditioning program at Florida here coming up in a little bit. But I think the depth is there, and I've pointed to every other position except the quarterback position. It's, hey, what can you do, aside from those guys? What can you do without that quarterback position? Because you're not, probably going to get the best possible coming out of that. Joe Burrow is the guy to fill in that gap. I mean, he really is the guy to fill in that gap and give you a quality signal caller.
Over on YouTube, Morgan Recton says, the one thing I really liked about Burrow was his accuracy. Even back in high school, very accurate. I'll also point out the rest of these folks on YouTube are talking about that video coming off the Florida graduation the other day. Did you see this? I didn't really feel like this was appropriate for us in SEC Country Live. It kind of goes in a direction we don't typically go on here on this show. That was a crazy video.
That was a crazy video.
Hop over to YouTube. They'll fill you in on the details.
Yeah, people getting shoved off the stage out of Florida commit. So, I mean, just a bad look overall.
I mean, listen, if Chauncey Gardner could make tackles like that, Jim McElwain might as well have a job.
Stop. Those guys are getting slung off the stage, elbowed. I want to know who the security guard was. Somebody needs to hire that guy.
Maybe our buddy Brandon Walker's in the comments. Actually, I don't know. We probably shouldn't be putting those videos up. That's probably for a different show and a different time. But it's pretty wild, pretty interesting.
That's not our medium.
I think you're probably right about that. Instead, let's do item number 2 here on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. And I thought this was somewhat interesting, although admittedly maybe I'm the only one here. One of our buddies that helps us out on SEC Country Live every single day, you hear me talk to Hannah here, who just sits off to my right. She also hosts a show for us from time to time. You've seen her on SEC Country, also on our Dog Nation page as well. She and Jeff Sintel do a recruiting show every Monday night. And last night, elite five-star wide receiver for the class of 2019, who happens to be a Georgia commit, Jaden Hazelwood, joins the show. And Jeff Sintel, one of the hosts, a recruiting analyst for Dog Nation, asks Hazelwood about the status of his current UGA commitment. And listen to the reason why Hazelwood says he still feels rock solid about UGA.
What do you think right now keeps you strongly committed to Georgia?
Just the staff, but I'm not going for a staff, to be honest, though, but I know that my boy Justin going to do right by me if I go there.
So it's great news. Five-star wide receiver. Rock solid commitment to Georgia. It's more than just the staff. He likes other things about Georgia, including that he knows his boy Justin Fields is going to do right by him. Now, I've said before that I don't think it's a problem that Georgia's got two potentially very good quarterbacks and maybe two very popular quarterbacks with a lot of recruits. I don't think it's a bad thing to have good players. But I can't help but wonder, when he says, hey, Justin Fields is going to do right by me, but for this year, when Hazelwood's already said he plans on taking visits, Jeff Sintel, the guy who you heard ask the question of Fields there, has called Hazelwood's recruitment contested. He's a Georgia commitment. It's been a commitment for a long time, but he's taking official visits to other places. Recruiting analysts like Jeff are calling it contested. What if Justin Fields doesn't get a lot of playing time for Georgia here in 2018? Does that potentially have a negative impact on Georgia recruiting? To me, it's a question that you can't help but at least be curious about.
Yeah, at least ask the question, right? And I think it does to an extent. I think that when you look at any five-star guy that's the number one recruit in the world showing up to a place, I think you definitely want to see him get on that stage because, those promises are made behind closed doors. I don't know what Kirby Smart told Justin Fields, but there's a reason that Justin Fields comes and plays behind a guy like Jake Fromm and tries to get the starting quarterback position. But here's what I'll say. In terms of what Hazelwood's bringing to the table, this is all about wins and losses for me, right? I don't think that you can sit there and Jake Fromm run the table, go 12-0, 13-0, whatever you think is possible as a Georgia fan, and him sit there and look and go, boy, this is a bad situation. Justin Fields isn't on the field. I think that it's all about wins and losses. Now, if you hit a skid and you lose a couple of games and Justin Fields still not playing and he's not coming around and he's not noted enough to help the team, then I think it becomes an issue for Hazelwood. But for me, wins and losses are everything in recruitment right now for Georgia, specifically when you look at a five-star guy that wants to play with other five-star guys.
I also think that Jake Fromm's a likable guy, and Hazelwood, who sounds like he currently likes Justin Fields, I think he could potentially like Jake Fromm too, as well. But I don't want to gloss over the nature of relationships. I think we're in an era right now where friends like playing with friends. I made the comparison of the NBA, and the NBA is a huge cultural influence in the world of sports right now. In the NBA, there's this era of super teams, superstars banding together. You see it with Golden State. LeBron's tried his version of this with the Miami Heat before, and I think that's been a huge influence on college football as well, where five-star wide receiver wants to play with five-star quarterback. Not just any five-star quarterback, but the particular quarterback that he feels a kinship with, the same 7-on-7 pass and things of that nature. So it's not nothing. It's not a net neutral impact on Hazelwood's recruitment and prospects like Hazelwood if Justin Fields doesn't get his playing time. At the same time, if Fromm were to maybe not get his full shot here, if some of the snaps go to Fields, that could also potentially impact recruits who are close to Fromm, and there are certainly plenty of those. This is an example of why, while it was certainly right for Georgia to bring in both Fields and Fromm, and you want as many good guys as you can at every single position, it is not a decision that comes without risk. When you bring in both these quarterbacks who have their own throngs of popularity, and there are a lot of guys at Georgia right now who are at Georgia because of Fromm, and there are a lot of guys at Georgia right now, or like Hazelwood, on their way to Georgia who are coming there because of Justin Fields.
Right.
When you have these two potential factions aligning there, it's not without risk. And I'm someone who thinks it's all going to work out. Even I have to admit, this is not without risk.
Yeah, no, I agree. I just think that it'd be hard for a guy like Hazelwood. Say Jake Fromm comes out and passes for 3,000 yards and does all the things that we expect Jake Fromm to do on this upward trajectory. He's going to have a good offensive line, going to have a good running game. His wide receivers look explosive. Jake Fromm comes out, throws for 3,000 yards. They make their way back to the SEC championship game. You can't tell me a guy like Hazelwood's going to look at that and go, well, because it's not my guy at the quarterback position, I'm not going to show up there. I don't see that happening. I think that there's a couple of ways to look at this, and the only way it goes south is if Georgia starts to lose games behind Jake Fromm and Justin Justin Fields doesn't see the field. I think even if Georgia loses games and then you have to plug Justin Fields in halfway through the season, I think it still looks good to Hazelwood. So I don't think there's a ton of ways this can go bad. I understand his recruitment's still kind of open, even though he's committed. I just think there's so many good ways to look at this for Georgia fans.
First of all, on YouTube, let me get a couple comments. Shannon Burgess says, work's been a little crazy the past couple days. Missed some, but gotten behind here in SEC country. Shannon, it's good to have you back. We appreciate you being here today. Hardwired for Self-Destruction says a great story would be Justin Fields and Emory Jones running at the same time and both being on fire there. That could potentially be a great rivalry. I'll agree with that. DJ Ammonstar, I hope I read that correctly, or maybe it's Jammonstar, says Justin Fields is going to beat out Jake Fromm eventually by the end of the year. We'll see if that plays out. And Old Brandt says, I'd love to see Justin Fields brought out in a red shirt, red zone situation, not red shirt, the exact opposite of that, playing in those red zone situations. I guess my only point here is, as someone who obviously from a fan's perspective doesn't want this to happen, I hope that not seeing what he wants to see from Fields as a freshman doesn't make Hazelwood more open to listening to pitches from Auburn, who he has visited, Oklahoma, which he does have a planned visit to. This is a guy that's on that circuit. He's on that visit. He has made no bones in the past about the fact that he's enjoying his recruiting process.
I think there's a ton of other things that could jump up ahead of him, because listen, and we've crossed this line before with Auburn and talking about Harold Joyner. Why did he go to Auburn? Or a guy like Owen Popo. Why did you choose Auburn? This threat of early playing time that Auburn is selling and that so many other programs are starting to sell against Georgia, I think becomes more hampering than anything. I think that when you look at that position, obviously, the wide receivers is one of the position groups where you feel like there's a ton of room for improvement, especially for a 5-star wide receiver. But I think that, to me, the depth chart at Georgia right now is a bigger, hamper to any of the recruitment that's going on than who's winning where and what freshmen are playing this year.
I think it's an interesting point. I mean, I'll say this too. While I raised the question and expressed some, concern about the potential risk here for Georgia swimming in these deep recruiting waters, the fact of the matter is, this is where you want to be, and you have to go if you want to win a national championship. You gotta handle tough recruitment. You gotta handle tough sales pitches. You gotta do that. What Georgia's doing is what's necessary to get to the top. It's just an example of the fact that it's not as easily said as done in terms of keeping everybody happy.
You can't do it, and that's kind of why when we get to topics like this and you talk about recruits feeling about a guy that's never played, it's hard for me to look at Kirby Smart, and I know that he's done it. Listen. You have to massage those recruits' feelings, right? Those 18-year-old kids, 17-year-old kids, you have to massage their feeling. But to a point, you also have to look at it and say, I've got to coach the football team. You know what I mean? I can't worry about what recruit's going to think about what player and what, whose feelings are going to get hurt if a certain situation happens. Kirby Smart's going to do what's necessary to go out there and get W's on the football field. And in the end, that's what I think will land Hazelwood and Athens.
All right, let's do item number 3 here in our SEC Country Line First and 10 list. Ryan Fowler's our buddy. We've had him on the show here before. He does a great podcast for us at SECCountry.com every single day, covering the Alabama Crimson Tide. And on his show earlier this week, he had on Brad Edwards, the ESPN college football analyst. And Edwards weighed in on 2 concerns for Alabama. But if they can navigate these concerns, Brad Edwards thinks that Alabama could be heading straight for the top and potentially even historically good. Listen to Brad Edwards here on Ryan Fowler's show. And Mike, tell me if you agree.
If the offensive line is, they don't have to be great, but if they're just good, I think Alabama offensively is going to be outstanding, maybe as good as they've been since Saban got there. And then as long as the secondary is good, I think that the guys up front will be their typical dominant selves, where I don't think they're going to have to cover receivers for 5-6 seconds in the secondary. So those are probably the 2 areas that you would look at that are the biggest factor in terms of whether Alabama is in position to contend for another national title. And that might even be something that doesn't really matter until the Iron Bowl. Whether they're good enough on the offensive line or in the secondary, they might have the majority of the season to kind of get those things ironed out.
All right, let me deal with these 3, because to me there are 3 specific issues that Brad Edwards brings up, and I want to deal with all 3. First of all, do you think Alabama's an offensive line away from having the best offense that Nick Saban has had since being in Alabama?
I do, but I'm not ready to slam dunk that point just yet. I think that there's 2 different things. First of all, I get on here and I talk about offensive coordinators all the time. What's this offense? Michael Locksley, to me, is not a slam dunk as an offensive coordinator. I think there's a couple of different directions. Look, now, do I think he'll be good? I think he'll be hard-pressed to not be good with the talent he's going to have on the field. It's kind of like Brian Dable last year. Did they set records? Absolutely not. Were they a good offense? Yes. And it's like he brings up, this might not matter until you get later in the season. I do think their offensive line is much overshadowed by that defensive line right now, and I think they have a lot of work to do. I think that you're probably going to see some position changes. I think Lester Cotton struggled so much in that spring game that you have to at least look at the possibility of moving a Ross Pierschbacher back to left guard. And listen, the backup center was Brandon Kennedy. Get news today that he's transferring out of the program. And so it's muddy waters. You have to find the right home. Now, do they have the talent? Absolutely. The talent's all over the board to get 5 guys on the field. Can you find the right 5 guys up there, and can you find somebody to snap the football? That's the big question, but I do think they're very close.
I agree with a lot of what you're saying. I think the Alabama talent's off the charts. I think it's the best crop of wide receivers in the entire country. I don't think that Tua Tagovailoa is as worthy of the hype that he's getting from some national media guys, but he's a major upgrade over Jalen Hurts. So there's plenty of talent there. We obviously know the situation with the Alabama running backs. But you touched on the Mike Locksley deal here. Now, I think a lot of this offense this year is going to belong to Dan Enos, who I do think was a pretty good offensive coordinator there at Arkansas. With all due respect to Locksley, I think that Enos was brought in to be a bit of a chaperone here for this offense. But to disregard 3 years of Lane Kiffin and saying, hey, this is going to be even better than those Lane Kiffin offenses were. I know Alabama fans love to scapegoat Kiffin for things that are wrong.
No, I agree.
That was a genius, brilliant play caller for Alabama, and to assume that Locksley and Enos, that combination, is going to miraculously be as good as Lane Kiffin, boy, that's not giving Kiffin as much respect as I think that he's due.
I 100% agree. And that's why, boy, this might be the best offense Bama's ever had. Think of how good that offense was in 2014 behind Blake Sims. I mean, they were explosive. No matter what you want to say about Lane Kiffin, he was an incredible offense coordinator. And while I think Michael Locksley will be very good, I'm not ready to move him into that status yet. I'm just not ready to put him next to Lane Kiffin as an offensive play caller. I think the talent will be there, and he'll be hard-pressed not to have a good offense. Will it be the best one ever? I think that remains to be seen.
How about the secondary here? The other thing that Brad Edwards mentions, no more Minkah Fitzpatrick. We know what a recruiting priority secondary has been really for the last 2 recruiting cycles for Alabama. I think that even continues into the 2019 cycle here as well. Do you have concerns about the Alabama secondary?
I think I'd be lying to you if I got on here and say, boy, they're going to be good no matter what. They got the best players all over the field. It's just hard to look at a group because what do you do every year? Boy, that left guard is going to have to help that left tackle. That quarterback's going to be helped out by the running game. These wide receivers, now that secondary will be helped out a lot by the pass rush. But the pass rush still has to get there too. And we're talking about 6 of Bama's top DBs being gone off last year's team. They're not just patching up a safety. They're not just losing a couple corners like you're seeing at other places in the SEC. 6 of their top DBs are headed to the NFL right now. So I'd be hard-pressed to say that they're all going to be good. Now, do they have the talent? Absolutely. The good thing is they've got some games to develop before they get later in the year and really face one of those high-strung passing attacks.
On Facebook, Drew Stanley says that Jarrett Stidham, the Auburn quarterback, is going to torch the Alabama secondary. Maybe that happens. But that actually brings us to the third point that Brad Edwards brings up here, the idea that these big issues for Alabama, trouble with the offensive line, questions to be answered in the secondary, that it may not be relevant at all to the final week of the regular season.
Yeah.
Mike, I don't mind telling you this, and you're not going to like this, but I don't say this to troll you. My biggest fear for Alabama in 2018 is this is actually a boring team and a boring story.
Right.
That 30-point favorite in a non-conference game against Louisville, blowing doors against SEC West competition that I don't think stacks up with Alabama until the final day of the regular season, and an Auburn team that's great at Jordan-Hare Stadium but sometimes struggles away from home, that even that's almost a foregone conclusion until you maybe get to a Clash the Titans type showdown with Georgia in the SEC championship game. But, I love the SEC. I don't like it when the SEC is boring. What Brad Edwards describes there is sort of a boring season where Alabama may have some questions, but we don't really see those questions put to the test until they face more legitimate competition in either late November or early December.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, too, because Brad Edwards in the piece with Ryan Fowler goes on to say, listen, I know that we look at it and think, boy, you got to probably look for one of these away games as a track game. Bama's won 3 national titles under Nick Saban where they lost a home game. 2011 they lost to LSU, they lost to Johnny Manziel in 2012, and they lost to Ole Miss in 2015. And it happens. And I try to bring it up as much as I can. The games you don't think will jump up and get you, jump up and get you. And it's happened in Bryant-Denny Stadium, and it's very possible that it happens again this year. I definitely think Baton Rouge is never going to be an easy task. I definitely think there's some teams coming in that can definitely deal you a loss. And I also think that now, if they were lining up today and I had to pick the game, I'm picking Alabama all over Auburn.
Yeah.
The dangerous thing for Alabama is that Auburn game is always at the end of the season. And like Gus Malzahn or not, He's been a very good coach at developing his offense as the season goes along. That's what makes that a dangerous one.
Over on YouTube, Joel Hayes says the Bama secondary are going to be fine by the time they crush Auburn at the end of the season. Cliff Nelson, in response to the commenter who mentioned Jared Stidham, Cliff says Stidham's not a drop-back passer. He's a play-action dependent passer. Stidham's not going to torch anybody's secondary. Who else we want to get here? We got Katie McCarty says Jared Stidham panics under pressure. So there's some debate going on about how Stidham fits in that conversation, and we'll see. Is Alabama challenged at all in the 2018 season before it gets to that Auburn game? Can LSU provide that? Can Mississippi State provide that? Yeah. Can another SEC opponent provide that? Obviously, Jimbo Fisher in his first year at Texas A&M comes to mind. I mean, I don't say this because I'm rooting against Alabama. I say this, I just hope so, because I hope there's some interesting games. Right, yeah, I hate the idea of uninteresting games for an entire season and a whole half of the league.
And we're getting to the point where you don't know which one it's going to be. Alabama's going to be double-digit favorites in almost every game they play, right? Every game in their schedule, you're going to look in double-digit favorites. What do we see year in and year out? LSU played you statistically close. You had to come back against Mississippi State, and you got beat by 2 touchdowns against Auburn.
Item number 4 on our SEC Country Line First and 10 list, and Mike Johnson, I'm going to give you a chance to take back some of the stuff you've been saying.
I'm not doing it, B.A. I'm not doing it.
Do it now or regret it later.
It's a runaway hype train.
One of the ongoing conversations we've had here on this show is how good South Carolina is going to be in 2018. I think they're a solid number 2 in the SEC East. I think they could win 10 games, maybe even 10 regular season games. I acknowledge some of the problems they had a year ago, including a penchant for playing way too many close games. But the point that I've made is one of the things that made those games closer a season ago than they otherwise would have been was the absence of Deebo Samuel, who was hurt after, the second game for 2017?
It might have been the second or third.
Coming back, expected to be healthy for 2018, and he's bringing hell with him because according to Will Brinson from CBS Sports, who's got this has got to be among the earlier 2019 NFL mock drafts, he has got Deebo Samuel, the South Carolina wide receiver, as his number 3 overall pick, going to the New York Jets if you care. I don't care about the team he has him going to. But if you're talking about a receiver who is good enough to be 3rd overall in the upcoming NFL draft a year from now, that's the kind of guy that if you're making comparisons between Tennessee, who doesn't have a player like that, Florida, who doesn't have a player like that, this is the kind of guy that gives South Carolina really an edge, a leg up, no pun intended, over a lot of these teams they're kind of considered to be in the mix with here.
Yeah, no, and I guess that I'm going to live and die by this statement, but I've never said that Deebo Samuel's a bad player. I just don't think that he's the kind of guy that makes you 2 wins better throughout the season. You know what I mean? I don't know if he's the guy that puts you over that edge. I know South Carolina fans feel that way, and they're probably right in feeling that way, especially when you see a number 3 in a mock come out. But I mean, come on, man, number three in the draft. I mean, Julio Jones and AJ Green, 5 and 6? For every good wide receiver I can think of in the NFL, I don't think I've ever seen one go number 3 that's turned out to be good. And so Deebo Samuel is very good.
Are you downplaying the value of being the number 3 overall pick in the
NFL
draft?
I'm just saying that I'll be shocked if we get to the draft and he's selected.
Mock drafts are wrong.
No. That's what I'm saying. To me,
you better hope this.
What was DJ Shark this year? At the end of the second round, something like that. Round 2, pick 30, something like that to Jacksonville. That's more what I see along the lines of Deebo Samuel. Very good player. I mean, don't discount what DJ Shark was to LSU. Good returner, good wide receiver, explosive. You got to find somewhere in the middle for me. So number 3 in the NFL draft is a little bit overhyped. I think he'll be very good. Don't get me wrong, South Carolina fans. Don't jump down my throat. Number 3, that's too much for me.
On YouTube, Katie McCarty says, I'm with Mike. USC Junior is way overhyped. Mike Johnson's daddy, or as MJD, I guess, says they're not overhyped. The rest of the East is just that bad. There is an element of that in which this is sort of true. When you look at the recent recruiting work that South Carolina has done, there isn't a whole lot in the East to really rival that. Now, if Burrow ends up at Florida, then I may be changing my tune here a little bit. That's the transfer quarterback we talked about earlier in the show. But as of right now, I like this South Carolina roster way better than the Kentuckys of the world, way better than the Vanderbilts of the world, even more so than Missouri. Traditional powers like Tennessee and Florida also seem to suffer by comparison here as well. And that's before you talk about a dynamic kick returner and receiver good enough to be, the NFL's version of a lottery pick.
I agree with you. To me, there's a lot of question marks. And I know that, listen, we had this question yesterday about South Carolina and how that, what are they going to do? Are they not going to get to 10 wins? I'm just telling you, you've got to prove it to me, man. And I've said this a million times on here. Go out and prove this to me what you're going to be. We say it about LSU all the time. A lot of question marks. What's the offensive line going to be? Are they really going to be very good under Brian McClendon? Is the defense going to get to where you want it to be? I'm not saying it won't happen, but you got to go out and prove it to me more than you did last year. If the bowl game is the best offensive performance you had all year, I don't know, man. We've had like 15 points. Like I said, 15 points against Tennessee, 13 against Kentucky last year. Not a very good showing against NC State, although you won the game. I need to see more of it out of this great head coaching quarterback combination and all these offensive weapons than I've seen the last couple of years.
I want to hear from Will Muschamp on this subject, or at least partially on this subject in a moment. Let me read Jamie Blanton, though, from the Facebook comment section, who says, Mike, that 10-point loss to Kentucky you talked about yesterday was 3 missed field goals and a missed extra point. That kicking game is fixed, and saying Deebo Samuel's the only hope we have, every team has a standout player. Besides, Roper strangled our offense a year ago. That's interesting wording. Why are you such a hater? There you go. He says put a case. All y'all betting alcohol. All the time with the betting the alcohol. He says put a case of beer on it. No fruity mess beer either. 10 or 11 wins. Jamie,
I'll put a case of beer on that all day. And listen, this is what you guys do, because obviously we wear our teams on our sleeves, right?
Yeah.
I'm an Alabama fan. He's a Georgia fan.
Sure.
And when I give my honest opinion, you guys think, oh, he's automatically a hater. Why are you such a hater? Not every team in the SEC can go out and win 11 games.
That's true.
It's just it can't happen. Not every team can go out and win 11 games. So when I tell you that I think they're more of like an 8 and 9 win team, that's not hating. That's me trying to be reasonable in terms of what I expect the SEC East to look.
Brandon Walker on the SEC Country official account says that he agrees with you. He does not see that with South Carolina. One of the things we may see, though, is one of the reasons why the Gamecocks and Will Muschamp, the head coach, were talking so much back during the spring about a brand new up-tempo offense is maybe because of the receivers like Brian Edwards, like Deebo Samuel, who we just talked about, leaning on that strength, hoping to get more out of it. In fact, here is Muschamp talking about his reasons and kind of how the implementation of that up-tempo offense was going back during the spring. Here's Muschamp.
They look good. I think it was one of the things I addressed with them at the end. I said, our tempo's got to continue to improve and get better, and we've got to have that spot the ball mentality on both sides of the ball. We were dragging a little bit on defense, but there's no doubt that it benefits our football team. You saw some things that opened up in the running game and the passing game because of the tempo today, but it also helps our defense as well in preparation for the fall.
Preparation for the fall, indeed. We'll see how it plays out. It'll be interesting to see if Deebo Samuel can stay healthy, how that weapon gets used by the Gamecocks. Let's do item number 5 here on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. And a story we didn't have time to talk about yesterday, but I do think it's kind of crucial here for the SEC, is the fact that a name we have mentioned before, Trey Watson, the graduate transfer running back from Cal, does not choose LSU, even though at one point in time he was thought to be in the mix there. Watson instead putting it out on Twitter that he plans to be a member of the Texas Longhorns. How about this edit? I believe this is what the kids would call a fire edit here. No pun intended, because there's actually some fire there.
This edit is 100.
There you go. Very good, Mike. Very good. He says committed, going to be a part of the Texas program. And on the one hand, I guess there's some concern for LSU if it even needs to take on a transfer running back. But the fact that it did not get him after he had been kind of in the mix there, how big of a concern is this for LSU?
I don't think it's a concern for LSU. I mean, this was never going to be a feature back, right? I mean, I think he's a good player. I think he would have been a good complementary piece. I think that their depth chart could have used a guy like Trey Watson. Do I think, for me, this takes a win or 2 wins off the board for LSU? Absolutely not. I think they've still got quality players back there, and I think a guy that's coming from the Pac-12, I don't know that you really fit in that LSU offense anyway. So he said he wanted to go play big-time football and wanted to see big boy football. He's going to show up to Texas and see what he can get. But I think the better move, honestly, in my opinion, would have been to go in LSU and line up behind that big-bodied offensive line.
Well, the one thing we do know is for LSU that he was never going to be the starting running back. It looks like Clyde Edwards-Helaire has got that locked down. In fact, coming off spring practice, Ed Orgeron had some very complimentary things to say about Edwards-Helaire. Take a listen.
I think Clyde shows that right now he's our most explosive back. Obviously, him and Nick are going to share first-team reps. But when Clyde's in there, we move the football, and he can make plays.
The reference that you also hear there is to Nick Brissett, and that's where, I hate to put a guy's business out there on the street like this, but that's really, it's Nick Brissett seemingly the reason why Trey Watson was even discussed here, because it does not look like Brissett, and it's got that same stranglehold on the number 2 running back position that Edwards-Helaire seems to have on that number 1 running back position, that you need 2 backs in the SEC in this day and age. If I'm reading the tea leaves correctly from Baton Rouge, They like their top guy, but the fact that they were even talking to Trey Watson, or at least talking about Trey Watson, means they don't necessarily love what they have behind Clyde Edwards-Helaire.
And I think that's fair at this point. I mean, remember, we're just now coming through spring. We just got done with spring practice a couple of weeks ago. I think Tay Provens in the end probably comes out to be that guy. I think you have to see a freshman splash. I think he's the guy that's going to be able to get that done. I loved his running style from what we saw in that spring game. I think he runs hard. I think he has flashes of that speed. And I think that if that LSU offensive line, that's a big question mark. If LSU offensive line develops in the way they think they will, get some help from some of the new guys showing up, then I think they have the chance to have a really good running game.
How about Joel Hayes on YouTube saying, Texas? The last time I saw Texas, Mike was paving the way.
I know. I gave him an attaboy, Joel. That's good memories right there, brother. You haven't looked at Texas in a while, man. I've been out of that game for quite some time.
But it does seem like, though, I mean, Texas, big-time football, I mean.
That's what I was alluding to.
It's like we've had this, here comes Texas. Texas is back. I mean, how many millions of times have we had that conversation?
Listen, if you guys want to call me a hater, now is going to be the chance, because big boy football in Texas and Big 12 and all that, it doesn't go 1-1 for me, man. You want to play big boy football, show up in the SEC West at a place like LSU and go toe-to-toe with those
What
guys.
I'm surprised to hear, though, is, on YouTube, we always have a great collection of LSU fans, guys like Tyler Manor over there, Shannon Burgess, who I mentioned earlier. I really haven't heard a lot from them in terms of their endorsement for the other running backs besides Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I know for the LSU fans who watch our show every single day, I know they like their starter, and I believe Edwards-Helaire is that guy. I haven't heard a lot of those same endorsements, though, coming from some of those, complimentary backs.
Yeah, we haven't had those endorsements from Ed Orgeron, like you just mentioned a minute ago. I feel really good about it. I think, one guy is separating himself, and I think that happens. I think when you look at Clyde Edwards-Helaire and some of the other guys, they're going to have the ability to run the football. It's just, can you find that Darius Geis and Leonard Fournette? And it's almost not fair to those guys, right? You can't look at those guys and say, boy, who's going to follow that? 2 generational running backs in a row for LSU. They're going to have to kind of piece together a running game that finds situational guys.
Let us do item number 6 here on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. And when Scott Strickland, the Florida athletic director, spoke on hiring Dan Mullen as the coach at Florida and listing the job description that he wanted Mullen to fulfill, one of the things that came up, got a lot of attention at the time, and maybe now we're sort of understanding why. Let me go back in time and let you hear Scott Strickland talking about one of the things in particular he wanted to see from Dan Mullen. Take a listen.
Dan is going to do a tremendous job of implementing accountability and toughness through a well-coordinated strength and conditioning program.
Accountability, toughness, well-coordinated strength and conditioning program. That's a pretty specific thing to say, and it's not the kind of thing that all athletic directors say when they hire a brand new coach, although obviously all ADs want that for their program. In Florida, though, that seemed like a more specific need. And this is a subject that's come up in the past here in SEC Country Live, and it's back relevant once again because of what an anonymous former Florida player apparently told one Florida website. Let me show you the quote here. It says, "It was a joke. I love Mike Kent to death." That was the ex-Florida strength coach. One of the best people I've ever met. Great guy, but it was a joke. He means the strength and conditioning program. We didn't really lift anymore. We stretched. Under a Muschamp, we lifted heavy, Olympic-style lifts. That's football weightlifting. We didn't lift for Max or do any heavy powerlifting under McElwain. Our program wasn't a serious off-season program. There was no accountability. If you missed a workout, there was no you had to make it up or get up and run the next morning. He goes on to say, if you missed a workout, you just missed it. They couldn't enforce anything, or they wouldn't, so they started making some things optional. Once you make it optional, what do you think is going to happen? Guys are going to take the option of not showing up. That's an anonymous former Florida player via a website known as Inside the Gators. Mike, what do you make of this stinging criticism of the way that Jim McElwain ran his Florida program?
This is the worst of 2 scenarios in the weight room. Let me try to explain what I'm talking about. When I got to Alabama, there was no accountability in the weight room. It was like this, you weren't going to get a phone call really if you missed. Now, you had to go to all the weight rooms. Somebody was going to call you. You probably have to run. There was not that much accountability, especially not from your teammates. Leadership wasn't there. When I got to the Atlanta Falcons, we did this not Olympic-style lifting. It was kettlebells. It was stretching. They were trying to take care of guys like Tony Gonzalez, trying to take care of guys. Why do you have to go in there and bench all this weight? We were terrible in the trenches. We weren't a very good offensive line. We weren't very dizzy. Add those 2 things together, college players, no accountability, you're stretching. That is terrible. I mean, that is a recipe for absolute disaster down in Florida, and that's exactly what you got last year. You had a string of injuries. You have all these guys all over the field that can't finish the game at a high level, and that's why you get a 4-win season out of Florida. That's why I'm so much higher on Florida going into next season, because they have changed that.
On YouTube, Hardwired to Self-Destruction says, hell, we already found out Florida was going to Mac Fitness to work out anyway. We did have that story a couple months ago about how some of these Florida guys were paying their own money on their own time to go get personalized training somewhere else because they weren't getting it at Florida. And all of this is terrible, and it just sort of paints the picture of why Jim McElwain probably got fired in the first place. However, and I'm no fan of Jim McElwain's, but there is an element of this that just sort of feels all too convenient after the fact. Ex-Florida player anonymously to a website. Jim McElwain was not running any kind of strength and conditioning program whatsoever. Maybe it had gotten a little bit lax, and maybe it was as bad as this guy says it is, but there is this SEC tradition of when a coach is on his way out, even one who is justifiably fired like Jim McElwain, it sort of becomes this Christmas tree. And you hang every single problem the program had like an ornament on the ex-coach on his way out the door. And all the problems are just sort of pushed out the door with McElwain, and all of a sudden there's this brand new rebirth under Dan Mullen, which may happen. Some coaches do come in and turn things around very, very quickly. It does happen from time to time. But this is so much, paint by numbers, repetition of what's happened in the SEC in the past. Every coach that got fired was the worst coach there ever was, and people can't stop telling stories about it. And every new coach that's coming in is the greatest thing since sliced bread, and everybody's falling all over themselves to praise the new guy. I believe that McElwain was probably a lax disciplinarian. I believe they probably were not doing strength and conditioning the most innovative way that it can possibly be done. But there is an element of this now that feels all too convenient.
And I understand that. I think that it's hard for me, knowing Jim McElwain, to hang a lot of this on him. Here's how I kind of feel about it in terms of this is all too convenient. So many times do you see a Nick Saban guy or an Urban Meyer guy, they get a job, and boy, why are they not getting back to where they should be? They know how the system should be. It's the attention to details, man. People don't understand the attention to details is what makes some of these coaches in these programs good or not good. And some coaches can do it, and some coaches can't. I'm sure Jim McElwain learned a lot from that. The one thing I will say in terms of the next guy, talk to Brandon Walker right now in the comment section about Nick Savage at Mississippi State. Talk to him about some of the other places and some of the players that were made so much better in this strength program. And talk to the guys that are showing back up. Taven Bryan going to the NFL, showing back up and saying, boy, it's all business. It's a culture change in there right now. I think that's such a big part, and I think Dan Mullen's been around enough strength programs now to have seen what works and what doesn't, and I think he's got his finger on that pulse.
So I like to think of our comment section, you and me sitting here, the people that help us with the show, I like to think of us as having one big conversation. And for the people a part of this big conversation right now, you're the only one qualified to make an evaluation about whose strength and conditioning program is good and who's not, because you've been in the trenches. I don't think that strength and conditioning is the kind of thing that you can look at and notice as much as some people want to say you can. I'll go back to the Auburn story the other day during the spring practice when the reporters were saying, hey, people got hurt. Does that mean you have bad strength and conditioning?
Right.
You can't draw the line from one thing to the other on something like that. And every team that loses, all of a sudden, their strength and conditioning is bad. This is more of a description for wins and losses than it is some sort of prescription for how you get better.
Yeah, and I understand that. And I don't think when you look at it physically, by the way, it's hard to tell in college football because there's so much turnover. Guess what? When I was at Alabama, when we got there, the strength program wasn't very good. All of a sudden, Nick Saban starts bringing in 5-star guys, and Scott Cochran shows up, and it's like, are we getting that much stronger, or are these guys just showing up like 30 pounds heavier than everybody and already built like an assault tank? So I think there's a little bit of carryover in both directions, but I think there is the conditioning effect that you can look at. And I said this a bunch to you last year. In the opening game when Florida played Michigan, I came on here and I said, Martez Ivey looked like he's out of shape. He's supposed to play left tackle.
You did.
He looked heavy-footed. He looked like a guy that should be playing guard, and he didn't look like he belonged on the edge. And it was very noticeable as they went through.
Daniel Robinson on YouTube brings up an interesting point. We'll make this the final point in the subject. He says, I wouldn't be surprised if strength and conditioning coach tried to do his job, but McElwain probably didn't have his back and didn't hold the players accountable. And there is something about that could be true here. I mean, this guy doesn't get a job at Florida unless he has some credential, some sort of background. Maybe if the discipline was gone from the program from McElwain's end, all of a sudden this guy's getting smeared. It's going to be hard for him to get another job when it's really McElwain more deserving of the blame than whoever this dude is.
I don't know. I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think it's kind of the opposite. Jim McElwain's going to be hard-pressed to get a job with some of the output he had down there. Maybe he thought he was making the right hire, and you just turn your back and you say, boy, new strength coach, go get these guys. You know, you've got it under control. I know that you feel really good about what's going on. You're an innovator. You know, you're using kettlebells. You're making the stretches. Trust me, I've seen it. All of a sudden, that guy can't get another job, and neither can Jim McElwain. Whose fault is it? I don't know. Jim McElwain should have paid more attention, and they should have done a better job in the weight room. It's both guys.
Let's do item number 7 here on our SEC Country Line First and 10 list. An interesting piece up at the website footballstudyhall.com today. That's part of the SB Nation family of websites about recruiting in the state of Georgia, not just the University of Georgia, but Georgia, the state in particular, one of the most robust states for elite recruits in the entire country. In fact, joining Louisiana in terms of being the top states for per capita blue chip prospects. Based on the total population, more 4- and 5-star prospects than any state in the country other than the state of Louisiana, which obviously with a very small population produces plenty of elite recruits. Only one problem, though, for the major in-state institution, Georgia. Georgia's had a lot more success with guys farther away from Athens than they have with the Atlanta area, which is where the majority of these elite recruits come from, and Atlanta is only about an hour's drive from Athens. In fact, here are the stats that Football Study Hall gives us here, that if you want to go back since 2006 for elite recruits recruited by Georgia, Georgia's gotten more outside of Metro Atlanta, 77, than inside of Metro Atlanta, 51, despite the fact that about 55% of the state's blue chip recruits do come from the Atlanta area. In other words, there are high-profile misses for Georgia in the Atlanta area, most recently the 5-star linebacker Owen Papo, who we talked about last week. Is it a problem for you that Georgia is not getting all or the majority of the elite Atlanta area recruits?
I don't see it as a problem. What are we talking about, elite? Are we talking about 4-star guys? Are we talking about 5-star guys?
A blue chip recruit is a 4 or a 5-star prospect.
I don't find that to be a problem. I think that UGA has been very selective in what they've done. And listen, we talked about John Parker Wilson yesterday, and he's talking about Tennessee when they're good. Boy, they recruit nationally, don't they? They go out there and get them. The talent's not so much in Tennessee as Tennessee has a national brand. They can go out there and get them. Recruit where the talent is. I mean, go out there and recruit where the talent needs to be. And Bama crossed this line a couple of years ago where all of a sudden you had really more guys on the roster from out of state than you had from in-state. Bama as a whole, as a university, crossed that threshold a couple of years ago. So you go outside of the metro Atlanta area. Now, you're going to get your guys. Atlanta's one city, and the United States is the whole United States. But I don't have a problem with it. Identify the talent, identify what your needs are and who fits in your program, and go get those guys. To me, the Atlanta thing is, something you'd love to hear and something to be a good talking point, but it doesn't always equal wins.
For the 2017 recruiting cycle, which was the cycle more than a year ago now, Kirby Smart earned some praise for the work that he did do in-state, not just the Atlanta area, but the state of Georgia in general. And on National Signing Day in 2017, he talked about the value of in-state recruiting.
I think the opportunity that the young men in this state have to come to the University of Georgia, play for the state university, and I think Thomas Davis has said it best many times, why go anywhere else? You got a chance to play for your state university and get a great education, one of the best educations in the country, and come here and do it at a special place that the people in your town root for most of the time.
And that's obviously why in-state recruiting would seem to work for a place like Georgia, but as Smart also acknowledged on the same day that it's not just Georgia kids the dogs are going to go after. Here's more from Kirby.
Not every kid will stay. We recognize that. It's not really been about that to me as much as it is getting the right guys in the state, not just getting the top guys in the state. We got to get the right guys that we need, and we got to be able to go outside the state when we need guys that the state doesn't provide.
So here's my only problem with that, and you kind of touched on something that's similar to what Kirby Smart just said there. The reason why this matters, and for the most part, listen, Georgia was number 1 in 2018 recruiting. They were number 3 in 2017. They were like number 6 in 2016. They've been doing just fine in recruiting, but in order to be recruiting at the maximum possible level, and that's what Georgia's got to do if it wants to ever overtake Alabama, because that's a program that is recruiting at the maximum possible level, you've got to win easy battles. And you've got to make battles easy. And think about this, if you were a single guy and every time you wanted to date, if you had to go to Chicago to find a girl, it just gets to be a little bit of a hassle after a while.
Absolutely.
Recruiting's the same way. You got to find the recruit next door so you can maximize your efforts to the ones that do take the work, either because they are 2 states over or because they've got, eyes for another school. You can't fight 25 hard recruiting battles. You got to win some easy ones, knock down some easy ones, so you can focus on the tougher ones. And that's why Atlanta, which for those that don't live in Georgia should understand, is only about an hour away from Athens. That's why the Atlanta recruiting matters here.
I understand it. When you talk about finding the best guys, and you've talked about, listen, that stat was going back to 2006. Obviously, Georgia had the #1 recruiting class last year, but I think of what guys have been great. I mean, Jonathan Allen's from Virginia. Cyrus Quandro's from Maryland. Minka Fitzpatrick's from New Jersey. I mean, the list goes on. Even guys that are from the state of Louisiana that have been very good for Alabama don't always come from Alabama. Now, you do have your Julio Joneses, but, you also have Chance Warmack from Georgia. You have they're from so many other states that let's not put a fence around what we can do. I know Kirby Smart comes out and says, let's put a fence around Georgia, and that's a good thing. But to me, that should be the top of the top coming out of Georgia, and that's why that should make it easier.
Let me take this to another school for a moment. Bo Molinari on Facebook, who's an A&M fan, says, I agree with Mike. Jimbo Fisher, that's his coach in College Station, he's getting recruits out of Alabama and Georgia.
Yep.
You get the guys that work for your program. But, Bo, here's what I'll say, and to anyone else who's watching right now who's a Texas A&M fan, if y'all let Tom Herman out-recruit you for the top 20 players in Texas over the course of the next 5 years, Jimbo Fisher's not winning a championship. And not only is he not winning a national championship, he's not winning an SEC championship. You've got to find yourself some easy recruiting wins. For Georgia and Atlanta, for Texas A&M and the state of Texas, if you get out-recruited in-state there, you can't come 3 states over and get a top 5 recruiting class. You just can't.
I agree with you, but to me, it's got to be the upper echelon. And I know that we say 4 stars are blue chip prospects. And listen, I was a 4-star recruit, so I'm not trying to downplay what that is. But I think that it has to be the 5-star guys. You've got to be able to win the 5-star or upper echelon 4-star guys. To me, if you're a mediocre 4-star guy and you don't fit at Texas A&M, and Texas A&M looks the other way and says, boy, we'd rather really get this guy out of Shreveport, Louisiana, or Baton Rouge, or somewhere up in Oklahoma, or really turn our attention to South Florida, I don't have a problem with that. I don't think in the end that equals losses.
All right, 2 more comments. Ken Feinberg says, to go back to what I said a moment ago, who would turn down a 5-star girl from Chicago? That may be fair. Maybe no one's going to do that. But Richard Smith says, to my point about easy recruiting wins, he says, what constitutes an easy battle? Sometimes an easy battle is someone that grew up liking their team no matter where he lives. And that is sort of the final point on the subject, because one of the issues for Georgia here is the Atlanta population has exploded so much. A lot of these recruits, including the Grayson 4 from last week, they didn't grow up in Georgia. So they didn't grow up with that ingrained sense of loyalty to Georgia, because a lot of these elite recruits from Georgia, the Atlanta area in particular, were born somewhere else.
I agree. And listen, I read an article today about Soapshire, the guy from Enmont, Louisiana. Who's recruiting you the hardest? Well, LSU is. Or an hour down the road, they really want me there. They think I'll be a big part of their program. Do you have any leaders at this point in time? Nope, no leaders. I'm wide open. There's no slam dunks when it comes to stuff like that. And you can put the whole where is he from thing on it. It doesn't always work in terms of that
but you're making my point for me, because the one thing that Ed Orgeron is doing poorly in comparison to previous LSU coaches is it used to be a sin to leave Louisiana.
I know.
I mean, it used to be an absolute abomination. Your name was mud if you left Louisiana. Orgeron has made it way too easy to leave via boot.
I agree, and that's something he's got to definitely turn around, and that's why you hear from a guy like Soapshire and saying, boy, every day I'm talking to them. Every day they're calling me, because I think that Ed Orgeron understands that, and he's trying to get that back on track.
Item number 8 on our SEC Country Line First and 10 list. We talked yesterday about Mississippi State linebacker Leo Lewis being arrested for not following police instructions on the heels of a house party, I guess it was being broken up. Not the worst infraction of all time, but the police told him to do one thing and he didn't, so therefore he got arrested. The real issue here is that Lewis is a bit of a controversial figure, dating back to his involvement in the Ole Miss NCAA case. He was one of the witnesses against Ole Miss there at that time. So according to Brandon Walker, who does our Mississippi State podcast here at SECCountry.com, and you saw Brandon last week right here on SEC Country Live. In fact, you see him in our comment section just about every single day as well. According to Brandon, some Ole Miss fans having way too much fun at Lewis's expense stemming from his arrest. Here's Brandon Walker to explain.
The absolute joy that Leo Lewis's arrest elicited out of Oxford and the other SEC fan base in this state was amazing. Absolute, pure, unfiltered joy, fueled by rage that Leo Lewis is the one that did all this to them when they did it to themselves. Leo Lewis didn't pay himself from the boosters' pockets. Leo Lewis didn't meet himself at undisclosed locations to get money from boosters. Leo Lewis wasn't texting himself from boosters' phones. But Leo gets arrested, and Leo is the enemy. Leo is what caused everything bad to happen in Oxford over the last decade or so. None of that's true, obviously. None of that's true. But go on Twitter. Go on Twitter and look at Ole Miss media guys that claim not to be fans that make snide comments about Leo getting arrested. Go look at Leo Lewis's timeline. The next time you're talking to an Ole Miss fan and they say State fans are obsessed, I want you to direct them to Leo Lewis's Twitter timeline and look at what Ole Miss fans say to that guy on Twitter.
So, Mike Johnson, I ask you, is it wrong for Ole Miss fans to enjoy Leo Lewis's arrest?
It's definitely wrong. Am I shocked? No. I don't think anything is shocking about any part of this scenario. I don't think that. And listen, it is what it is. It doesn't matter if this guy had, ratted you out, or if this guy caught the winning touchdown pass. It's hard to. I mean, like, I mentioned this on Twitter today, and I think someone on Twitter asked, "When's the last time you booed somebody?" I booed Gus Malzahn at Talladega last weekend. Did Gus Malzahn do anything to me? Did he spur my program? Absolutely not. Did I boo him till my lungs almost came in my throat? Absolutely. That's just the way SEC football is. And while I understand that it's bad, you look at it and say, boy, this young guy, he commits a misdemeanor and everybody's jumping on him. That's the nature of the beast, man. That's the nature of the beast. He's had lawsuits. I don't think it'll affect Mississippi State's football team. I think that the outlook on it is probably kind of bad for some of these Ole Miss journalists, but for the fans, this is just another day in the state of Mississippi.
And you say it's just another day. By the way, the SEC Country official account says, boy, that MSU host sounded handsome. I think you know who it is that's making that comment right now. It's our buddy Brandon Walker. But, you compare the Egg Bowl rivalry to the Iron Bowl rivalry. Obviously, the Iron Bowl rivalry is among the more prestigious rivalries, not just in college football, but really in all of sports in general. But I don't believe the Iron Bowl holds a candle to the Egg Bowl in terms of outright legit hatred. Because what Auburn and Alabama fans are not doing to each other, and what the two programs are not trying to do to each other, is sort of put the other one out of business.
Right.
What's going on between Ole Miss and Mississippi State, and this is fascinating. Y'all, I wouldn't miss the Egg Bowl on TV for anything, because these two programs are trying to put the other one out of business.
You
got Leo Lewis trying to get Ole Miss, sent to the death penalty. So I'd love to be like, Mr. High-minded academic egghead and look down from my ivory tower on the plebeian, is that the right word, plebeian SEC fans and say, y'all don't laugh when a rival player gets in trouble. But Leo Lewis turned state's evidence against Ole Miss and, an NCAA deal here. At that point in time, I feel like it's almost asking too much for Ole Miss fans not to revel in what, I don't think this is his demise, but what appears to be his demise. It's almost too much to ask for. It's too juicy of a subplot. As controversial as this may sound, I actually got to kind of defend Ole Miss fans on this.
No, I did, and I tend to agree. Like I said, I'm not shocked in any way by what's going on here with Ole Miss fans. Now, if you want to turn this into you're a non-biased journalist thing, there's an argument to be had there, but Ole Miss fans are going to Ole Miss, and let's not act like if things weren't flipped in the opposite direction that any other fan base would be different.
Yeah, I'd love to tell you that the car crash that is the Egg Bowl rivalry every single year, I wasn't peering in it like this. I can't get enough of that. It's like the best reality show.
They're going for
television.
the jugular, man. You're right. They're trying to bring each other down.
All right, item number 9 on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. We found something interesting this week about a SEC coach who apparently had a pretty cool job before he got into coaching. I'm talking about Vanderbilt coach Derek Mason, who made an appearance on the Sirius XM radio show called SEC This Morning, and Mason let the host know at one point in time in his past, he was a DJ. Here is what Mason said to the host. I used to be a DJ. I got turntables at home. I spin music at night, and I spin a little music in the morning when I wake up. I'll put on a little something. Sometimes I change it around. Sometimes it's Kendrick Lamar. Sometimes it may be a little Ohio players. I'll move it around. When I was in college, I had a late night radio show. It was Midnight Groove from 12 to 1:30. I used to lay it out in college. Afterwards, I would DJ some parties. That's Vanderbilt coach Derek Mason on SEC This Morning. I am calling total BS on the idea that Derek Mason, as an SEC head coach, is waking up in the morning and spinning a little music. He's got like the one headphone like holding up the sign. He's doing that deal. Oh. Derek Mason is not doing that at 40-something years old.
If there was ever a coach in the history of SEC football that I thought might be a DJ at some point in their past life, this is the guy.
You're arguing a different point. Was he a DJ at some point in time? Absolutely. Does he own, at least I find that believable, does he own some DJ equipment? Maybe I might even buy that as well. But he said, can we just see the quote just real quick? He says that he still does it now. I spin a little music in the morning when I wake up. He ain't spinning no music when he wakes up.
I tend to agree with him, man. I tend to think he's telling the truth. I really do.
Why don't you try a little harder?
Well, what's the upside to lie? This recruiting?
Yeah, he's trying to impress kids.
Man. Listen, there's so many other ways to go about repressing these kids. I don't find any upside to this in terms of
As a matter of fact, if you put like the wheels of steel right here on this table, I think there's a chance I'm as good of a DJ as Derek Mason is.
Now, how can you argue that he might have been in his past, but yet that you think you can spin better than him right now?
Because I think it's one thing to. I know what college radio stations look like. That's not Skrillex or one of those like EDM guys. That's not what they're doing.
I don't know who you're going to recruit at a higher level by saying you were a DJ in college. I really don't.
All right, let's do item number 10 here on our. Speaking of coaches we almost never talk about. Item number 10 here on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. I don't really understand a lot about this, but Missouri coach Barry Odom was hanging out with some of his players playing a little pickup basketball, and then things went horribly wrong for Odom here as he's going to be showing up on a poster near you at some point in time here. How about Adam Sparks getting up and bringing it down, dunking on his own coach here? I'm going to cry foul on this. You got to show a little more respect for your coach than that, don't you?
I'm so glad you say that. I didn't want to be the guy that's like, well, that's pretty cool. Can you imagine this happening to almost any other coach in the SEC?
Not any coach in like good standing.
I can't imagine this happening to any other coach in the SEC. I really can't. I'm trying to think. Nobody would do this to Dan Mullen or Jeremy Pruitt or Will Muschamp or Mark Stoops or this wouldn't happen to anybody else.
Unbecoming of a coach.
This wouldn't happen to any other coach in the SEC.
This is unbecoming of an SEC coach.
Maybe Ed Orgeron.
You can't get dunked. You can't get dunked on by one of your players.
I don't know. You can't come back from that, man. That's bad.
All right, item number. Well, actually, that's all of our first and 10 lists. But we always close the show the same way here on SEC Country Live. We're always looking for champions of life, and today this is a personal favorite for me, although I don't know if it's going to be quite as funny for you. So the legendary ring announcer Michael Buffer, who you've seen do boxing a million times, even did some pro wrestling back in the day, been brought out for NBA teams. He's famous for his "Let's get ready to rumble" catchphrase. Well, he was, I guess, also brought to, is this an English Premier League, probably some sort of soccer deal here. And, well, he's doing his announcement, doing his shtick. Only problem is the sprinkler heads come on, but like a pro, like a champ, Buffer soldiers on. I love this video. Watch this.
And now, in the blue corner, from Chelsea, London, number 13, Thibaut Courtois.
All right, here it comes.
Number 2, Antonio Rudiger.
So far, everything's going exactly the way it's supposed to be.
3,
now here comes the water.
Alonso.
He's about to get pelted by the sprinkler.
Cesc Fabregas.
First of all, the hair doesn't really even move, which is like almost like a magic trick in its own right. And kind of on he goes there. You got to give Buffer some credit for this, right?
You do, but don't you have to have a little more wherewithal? Like, boy, the range on that sprinkler head, I think that might be able to get to where I'm holding this microphone. Like, don't you have to think about that before you get on that thing?
Surprised you get electrocuted. Hey, nonetheless, we appreciate being with us on SEC Country Live today. We'd love to have you check out our podcast. It's available pretty much wherever you find podcasts. Just look for SEC Country Live. Subscribe on Apple Podcasts. Give us a rating and review. That's a huge help. Also, share the video show with your friends on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter. Let them know we're talking about the SEC here every afternoon. We'll be back 3 p.m. Eastern Time again tomorrow for another episode of SEC Country Live.